Morning everyone, and welcome to the 7th session in our GDS webinar series. To get things started, today we welcome back industry icon Peter Kirby. A lot of you guys would know Peter from his 20 years in the turf industry, a lot of research and technical roles. He'll be presenting today on preventative programs for Fairy Ring and ERI. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Peter now.
Okay, thanks for your time today. But I think the key today is just really talking around fungicide programming and how we look at putting programs together when we're targeting both diseases. Because as Paul said, preventative application is a much better way of controlling these diseases than curative means. Obviously, the first one I'll talk about is fairy ring management. I think everyone's sort of battled fairy ring before. Essentially, as we know, fairy ring produces a mushroom. There's over 60 causal organisms or fungi that produce, that can cause fairy ring issues in turf situations. And obviously they produce, mushrooms or puffballs or some sort of fruiting body at some point in time during their life cycle. The main pathogens that we usually sort of battling with in Australia. Probably the biggest one is Lycopodium, which is basically a puffball fungi, and it's by far the biggest one. The key is though, mushrooms look like puffballs when they first come up. So obviously the actual mushroom itself is the fruiting body, and the whole point of that fruiting body is like a flower, and then that flower releases. Instead of releasing seed, it releases spores. So as a result, basically you've just got to be careful when you're looking at these things that when they all come up, they first look like puffballs, and it's very hard to sort of determine between which one it is until they fully develop. And obviously in a green situation, we're sort of cutting them off before they actually get to that full fruity body stage. So a lot of times we think we've got Lycopodium species, which is the true puffball, but there is other species. We just need to make sure that we're dealing with the actual mushroom, we're correctly identifying it. Obviously, that we see a lot of mushroom activity. So as we know, there's the group of fungi that all of these are in a basidiomycete fungi. They have the potential to grow very deep in the root zone, so they can even grow into the gravel medium in a grain. And one of the things that they're really good at is, because they can go so deep in the soil profile, they can access moisture at any depth. So even in really dry conditions, they still survive, even if they have to go into a stable stage or a resting stage. They, as soon as rainfall comes, they basically initiate growth again. Sort of basically grow inoculum, grow mycelium through the soil profile, and then eventually you'll see the mushroom pop up. So it's basically the whole point of it, is to grow masses of mycelium through the root zone, push the mushroom up, and then release spores, and they go nuts. And then essentially, obviously, that's how they spread and develop into other greens. They go into, they're very easily blown by wind, water, or machinery. Okay, so I guess from the symptom side of things, obviously during the summer months we generally see most issues, and I'll talk a little bit about more as to why, but obviously it's due to hydrophobic conditions that the mycelium sort of produce. And from a classification, you'll see this in a lot of text around fairy ring development, how we classify fairy ring fungi. But essentially you can see there, type 3 fairy ring is just really the mushroom being produced. So, it's more of a nuisance, pops up, gets in the way, looks unsightly, and most of the time we sort of mow that off. And it doesn't really create any problems for turf growth other than just having those mushrooms there in the way. Obviously, type 2 fairy ring are green rings of stimulated growth. So So these fairy ring fungi feed on lignin and thatch, and basically thatch is a high proportion of thatch is lignin. And then basically once the byproduct of them consuming that lignin is they release ammonium into the soil. And then that ammonium, obviously, then the plant takes it up, basically grows and obviously creates, a fairy, a ring type patch of stimulated growth. And again, that's obviously the mushroom development, the mycelium development in that situation is quite severe. So there's potential for that to become problematic. And then, basically, and that's where, where the one we don't want in turf is a type 1 fairy ring, which is basically where we get all that mycelial growth creating hydrophobic conditions within the soil environment. And you can see there, a really discoloured ring, losing turf, loss of nutrient and water availability to the plant as a result of the hydrophobic nature. And the scary thing is that we can go from a type 2 fairy ring to a type 1 fairy ring quite quickly. So, we're talking a couple of 40-degree or high 30-degree days. You can really create that really severe situation that we don't want to get to in turf management, because we start losing turf and it takes so long to come back again. Okay, so one thing to point out on these rings is that you can see there the ring is actually quite round, and really these spots start in very small, so you can see a little ring there forming. And if you think about a piece of fruit and you've got fungus growing on a fruit, the actual the disease grows outwards. So basically, this whole it just continues to expand radially over time. But what people quite often, I see it in textbooks a lot, where they talk about putting in basically just putting a product in watering can and sort of watering the fungicide in just around the ring itself. But that whole patch is pretty much full of mycelium. So obviously that disease is growing radially outwards, and all of that patch actually is mycelial growth in the inside of it. So what we're dealing with is massive amounts of mycelial growth in the root zone, and that's why curative control of fairy ring is very difficult, because it's basically once we get the situation where these rings are quite big, we've got massive amounts of mycelium propagules in the soil environment, and we need to knock that down. And as a result, using fungicides, we need, it's a numbers game, and it's a bit like coronavirus. You basically need to just keep knocking it down and preventing it from keeping that number under control. And it's about, sort of continually getting on top of it. And that's why curative control, once you get that fairy ring development, we're basically taking bits of mycelium out from each application, and that's why it takes 5 or 6 applications to get a full result in knocking down the fairy ring after we get such a big problem with it in the ground. Okay, so just to point out, these are there are 60 species that we can get in turf, obviously all part of that Basidiomycete group. There's different types of Basidiomycetes as well, so they're generally classified into 2 groups. One is lectophilic group, which means that they feed more on the thatch and leaf material, and then we also have the edaphic sort of fairy ring group, which is more soil-loving group. So just to point out, sort of what we're dealing with, it's actually the world's biggest single organism on Earth is actually a fairy ring type fungus, which is Armillaria. So it's a lignin consumer, and it consumes trees. So it actually does infect plant, but that's only because it's basically breaking down the lignin in the roots of trees. But this material, this actual Armillaria species has been slowly growing and decomposing oak tree roots in the US. It's 1,500 years old, so these things can last quite some time. And it's basically estimated to weigh 21,000 pounds. So you can imagine, obviously we're not going to see that in a golf green situation, but we are going to see, we are dealing with something that's a survivor. It will come back, and it will be problematic for a period of time. So if we do have a fairy ring issue, and it's been there for quite some time, it's going to keep coming back at us, and we need to get on a consistent program over a period of years to really knock down the numbers and get it under control. Because we get a good result one year doesn't mean that it's gone. It's going to come back. It's been here longer than us probably. So yeah, it's just something that we need to sort of take into consideration when we're talking about fairy ring control. Okay, so one of the questions I get a lot is, why does it seem like we get more fairy ring issues nowadays than previously? And I think there's a few reasons for that. One is obviously a general reduction in fertility practices, obviously with particularly around pole management down south. We're trying to not encourage power. As a result, there's some people are reducing their nutrition practices, and as a result, we're not masking the rings in the greens as much as we were, or in the sports fields or whatever. Obviously lower mowing height. So, obviously we're trying to get perfection. And by having lower mowing heights, I guess we're creating more thatch. And obviously these things feed on lignin in thatch quite a bit. So, that's one of the reasons. Obviously, we continue to use sand and in top dressing and in construction, which is obviously a great material from a drainage perspective and getting water away from the root zone, which is ideal for most turf diseases. But I guess what sand is very good at is moving water through. And then what we do get in that situation in a sand profile is that essentially that drying sort of wetting cycle, and that's what fairy ring loves. It it grows deep in the root zone to access moisture, so it can access moisture better than most diseases. And then when we get rain, it basically goes into overdrive and basically initiates that whole disease development process. All about pushing mushrooms up and disseminating the disease further. And basically, so we in a way, by using sand, we're encouraging fairy ring activity to come. Obviously, in sand profiles, they're quite, they're quite inert as a result. We haven't got a lot of microbial activity or anything sort of attacking the fairy ring or competing against the fairy ring. So it's almost got a free run in the sand profile to, have a party in there and sort of grow. And irrigation practices, obviously the whole point from it is similarly to what we just said, obviously longer wetting, like we're trying to reduce the amount of moisture around the plant, for other diseases. Obviously that comes with, creates a wetting drying cycle, which obviously fairy ring, is quite happy with. So as a result, it's all these things, and there's nothing we can do from a turf management perspective. We need to do all of these things, but that's why we're seeing it more and more. And obviously from a climate change perspective, I'm sure that people down south are saying at the moment that with the cooler conditions they're getting, that it's not as if they don't feel like we're in climate change, but obviously the climate is changing. And the warmer the climate, obviously these things thrive more efficiently. Okay, so in terms of fairy ring, it's important to know which mushroom we're dealing with, or which fairy or fungus we're actually targeting. That changes our number one. It changes basically the fungicides we're using in the program, and two, it changes a little bit our timing of our applications. But they all have a similar growth range, but it's around temperature. But there is times where we need to change a little bit. So probably the key thing is if you are getting consistent fairy ring and you do see the mushroom come up, it is worth either taking a photo of it or basically pulling it out and putting it in a plastic bag and sort of getting it identified properly. If we can identify the fungus, we can obviously help you put a program together much more efficiently. So as I said before, the biggest one in turf management in sand greens in particular is lycoperdon. So that's the puffball type fungi. The puffballs never really produce gills underneath. So the difference between a puffball and an actual true mushroom is that you never see the gill arrangement there, and they're enclosed in the top of the mushroom, where obviously a true mushroom is a bit like this maraspius there, where you can see the gill arrangement, obviously the still as well. So I would say that lycoperdon is probably a large percentage in most of the situations we're dealing with, but we definitely do see maraspius in Australia, a bit. We also see Bovista particularly in sports fields and so forth. We see a lot more of that. And Agarus livy is another, we see that growing in garden beds a lot, feeding on organic materials and so forth in garden beds. But obviously, it's more of a thatch dweller, and we see it in heavy thatch greens. It's sort of can be quite common and popping up, and the good thing about it is it's quite easy to identify, given that it's a bit smaller than most of the true mushrooms. Okay, so in terms of, I guess, the puff, as I said, puffballs are the most common. Basically in the US, they're seen as the most common mushroom in sand-based putting greens, and similar to here, and pretty much around the world. It's one of the ones that we're sort of targeting the most, and you can see there the lack of gill arrangement underneath it, like a true instead in comparison to like a true mushroom. So the gills are there, but they're just enclosed within that, I guess, whole fruity body. Okay, so I guess, what are the issues that fairy ring cause? Obviously, this whole, one thing is that they obviously don't parasitize turf. That's not what they do. But what they're very good at is altering that whole growing condition within turf. So by, this whole they create this massive mycelial activity, which basically creates a soil, I guess, an environment that's very hydrophobic. So you can see there a range of, I guess, a column there, and this is with mycelial growth growing through it, and basically water droplets being put on there. And we've done this before, and it can take for a long time to basically penetrate. So as a result, obviously this whole growing system is pretty much screwed up as a result of this lack of moisture. So as a result, we're not getting nutrient movement into the soil environment. Obviously, as we know, a lot of nutrient goes into the plant via liquid situation, same with chemicals. So if we can't get water into the profile, we obviously can't get inputs into the plant. And if we can't get good drainage through the profile, this ammonium that is produced as a byproduct of the breakdown of the lignin as they feed on it, obviously we get it builds up, and it builds up to a level that can be quite toxic, and because we can't get water to flush it through, it can become really problematic. So ammonium production is toxicity becomes a real problem, and that's where there's a lot of research, or a lot of people trialing using nitrification inhibitors to reduce that ammonium availability to the plant in those situations. But still, at the same time, we actually need to get the nitrification inhibitor down into the root zone to actually control the ammonium. So obviously, wetting agents play an important part in overcoming that hydrophobic nature. So then we can get all the inputs back moving into the system, and then getting nutrient availability moving again, and pesticide input and everything else that gets put into the system. One of the other things due to that whole hydrophobic nature is not just build up of ammonia, but other salts as well. So we can get, sodium, some of those things we just can't flush through as efficiently. And as a result, they start to build, and obviously that has the negative effects that sodium has on the plant. So I think, overall, it's obviously, it just screws that whole system up, and it just takes time to sort of build that again. And sort of we need to overcome that hydrophobic nature in the first place in order to get the system moving again and get turf going in the right direction. Okay, so I guess conditions favouring fairy ring disease. Obviously, as I said before, sandy soils, I think I explained that. Newly constructed greens, obviously a lot of times when we're constructing greens, we push the plant to sort of get coverage over, which creates a little bit of organic material in thatch development. Obviously, there's lignin there, and as a result, without competition, we get fungi growth, or fairy ring fungi growth. Obviously, excessive thatch. One of the big things that I've seen in a lot of green situations where they're getting chronic fairy ring activity is just massive amounts of thatch, and obviously that's just massive amounts of food source that basically the fungi can feed on, and as a result, it grows quickly and can become really problematic quite quickly. Extremes in soil moisture, as I said, so obviously, massive rainfall events will generally get a lot of growth of the fairy ring, and that's when it starts pushing mushrooms up. It's been even in situations we've seen where we've had a heavy rainfall events and we take a plug out of the green. Sometimes you can actually see the mushrooms still growing beneath the surface, and it takes time for it to grow and get up above the soil or the turf environment. So massive, like big heavy rainfalls, you always see a lot of my fungi sort of come up after a major rainfall event, and that's just really that, as I said before, that whole production is in overdrive when they get that massive amounts of moisture. Obviously, nutrient deficiency, especially obviously nitrogen. If we have a nitrogen deficiency, obviously we don't mask that ammonium release in the grain, and obviously we see the fairy ring patches a lot more vividly. And obviously, old grains can also be problematic from the point of view that they have, potentially there's a lot of tree roots in there, other organic materials which have got into the grain, which obviously, as I said before, some of these basidiomycete fungi consume lignin out of trees. So if they're basically feeding on tree roots, that's a real food source, and generally we see more the true mushrooms sort of doing that. So there's a number of situations. It's sort of, and that's why I guess fairy ring is a problem, because it can be, it can be in older grains, can be newer grains, it can be in pretty much any grain. So it's just a matter of managing that number if we do get the population up. Okay, one of the things I just wanted to point out was what we've been doing lately is just looking at, people that are getting massive amounts of fairy ring, and are having problems, sort of managing it. We've actually been getting plugs taken out of the grain, so we try and get as deep as we can go, get a full golf hole changer type plug, out of on the edge of a fairy ring patch, and we actually send that to a lab, and so obviously one of the key things is to package it up properly. Don't let any of the soil drop off. So quite often use aluminium. You put it in wet paper and put aluminium foil around it to really hold it well together and send it to the lab that way. But what we can do is actually put it in, once it gets to the lab, they put it in through an incubation process. It's high humidity and it's at a consistent temperature of 21 degrees Celsius. And what we can do in that situation is then sort of grow the disease on over a 7 to 10 day period. And it actually helps us determine where the fungus is. So if the fungus, because I said before, some are lectophilic and can grow in the thatch in the leaf, and that's where sort of those thatch collapse type diseases come from, and some grow in the roots or in the in the soil environment. So understanding where it is helps a lot with placement of the fungicide when we actually do understand where it's at. So that this picture here is actually one from a green in Brisbane, a golf green, and you can see there it's obviously we plate this out, and we can actually also look at it on the microscope, and fairy ring produces basically a clamp shape, a very distinctive mycelial growth, so it's very easy to identify that it's a fairy ring, but we still don't know all basidiomycete fungi. What we don't know is which one until we get that mushroom up. But what we can do from this is just help you understand where the disease is most prevalent, and then obviously position the fungicide accordingly. So, we've got one here that's basically growing on leaf material and thatch material, and then we have some here that are growing deeper in the soil environment. So, and they can grow deeper than that as well. So, just helps with understanding where we need to place the fungicides to get the best result in the longer term. Okay, so I won't take too much time on this, but obviously cultural control practices, anything where we can open up the green, get water through, get through that sort of hydrophobic layer that it's producing is beneficial. So, aerification, verticutting, anything we can do, even needle tining and spiking, is very useful in just breaking up that that basically hydrophobic layer up and allowing water to get in and try to get that whole turf system back to normal, and allow oxygen exchange and let gases release and all that sort of thing. So as a result, that's highly beneficial. Water management, obviously, trying to get, it's important to obviously water deeply, try and get water, in any way you can. Obviously, fairy ring symptoms are exacerbated on, I guess, thin and poorly growing nitrogen deficient turf surfaces. So managing nutrition as a foliar, even in those situations, to try and get some nutrient into the plant is a good thing. And as I said before, probably the biggest cultural control practice that we can do is putting soil surfactants in the program and overcoming that hydrophobic nature. I'll talk a little bit more in a minute, just around what we need to do with surfactants and sort of with and getting our timing right with fungicides and so forth. So, okay, so in terms of fungicidal control strategies, I think there's a lot of US data. If we look in the US, at a number of the universities, they put out a lot of literature around fungicide activity on fairy ring. And this is just some coming from NC State University. So you can see there, basically, the way that they rate these fungicides is 1 is inconsistent control, 2 is, fairly good, 3 is good to excellent, 4 is consistently good to excellent. So obviously, the higher the number, to 4, the better the performance that they see. And because we're dealing with, the US and Australia are very similar in terms of the fungi that actually create fairy ring. So, this data is quite, good, for us to look at and see which products are working well, because we've actually worked with the same pathogens anyway. So essentially here you can sort of see number rated 4 is azoxystrobin tebuconazole, quite strong. Azoxystrobin difenoconazole is quite strong. So that one's not in Australia at the moment. This top one here is Evolution. Azoxystrobin by itself, so there's a number of brands of those. It's 3, so it's reasonably good. Tebuconazole is very good. So a lot of the work done by Lane Treadway, and which is a researcher in the US, has shown that tebuconazole is very strong on a preventative basis for fairy ring. Azoxystrobin is pretty good too, but tebuconazole is consistently good across a number of university trials in the US, and so it's one that we use quite a bit in Australia for that preventative fairy ring approach. Flutalanyl ProStar or Monstar in Australia, reasonably good, better as a curative or an early knockdown than a preventative. Azoxystrobin propiconazole, so that's Headway Max, it's just okay. Triatomethon isn't available in Australia, but we have something similar in Bayfidane or Citadel, which is triadominol, so it's strong. Penthopyrad, which is Valista, quite strong, both as a preventative. I like to use it as an early curative as well, because it's got good curative properties. And pyraclostrobin, which currently isn't registered, but there is a bit of development work going on with that. It is actually registered now, so for turf in Australia. So there is a product with that in it. And it's reasonably good as well. So basically, and this is just from another university. So this is from Lane Treadway. You can see there. So again, 4 is the highest and the best control, similar to what we did before. 1 or 2 is lesser control. So you can see there again, tebuconazole rates really well in terms of its control. Triatomethon or triadominol, quite good or very good. And there's a few there that we don't have registered. And then as we go, there's sort of you can have a look through this. I'm happy to sort of share this around to anyone who wants it. Okay, so basically what we know, and a lot of this work was done by Lane Treadway, is that in terms of timing of fungicide applications, we need to use a 5-day average soil temperature at a 5 centimetre depth. But what we need to do to get best control is we need to hit the disease when it's trying to inoculate and grow through the greens at its most. So, and what they know from the US is that if we get 2 applications out before soil temperatures reach 21 degrees in spring, we take out a lot of inoculum, we stop the disease from growing significantly, and we have a better chance of basically getting on top of it. So as a result, they want to initiate applications around 15 to 18 degrees Celsius, and we need to get 2 applications out by 21 degrees. And if we do that, we know that we take out as much inoculum as we possibly can. And obviously we can still use fungicides later in the season to help sort of knock down, but you know, that preventative approach is key to basically managing that inoculum and that growth of the fairy ring in that green during that time. So if we can maximise our efforts to getting those few applications out before 21 degrees Celsius, we go a long way in actually managing the disease much more efficiently. As I said before, around source surfactant timing, one of the other things we need to look at is that source surfactants have been proven with particularly DMI chemistry. So tebuconazole is a DMI, a group 3 fungicide. And it's one of the key ones in the programs that we generally recommend. If we put a wetting agent with it at the time of application, and we let it sit on the leaf for any length of time, basically the surfactant actually helps tebuconazole. They're geared to be actually driven into the plant. They've got actually, they call it a warhead on the molecule, which actually goes into the plant quickly. So as a result, if we mix the wetting agent with it and leave it sit on the leaf even for half an hour, you know, it starts to move into the plant, and you know, we can't control the fairy ring fungus if the active's in the plant. So as a result, we actually, most of the time now, and a lot of the newer research coming from the US shows that we actually need to split those applications out. Don't put the wetting agent with the DMI fungicides, because we don't want to encourage it to get into the plant. We need to get it down into the soil or into the thatch environment where the fungus actually is. So, sorry, that's a spelling mistake. That's supposed to be flutalonol, which is Monster, and then petflochlorade's for Lister. So essentially, and then if you think about source surfactants and overcoming fairy ring, one of the things that what we do need to think about is, you know, if we mix it with the fungicide at the time of application, we don't really seem to get, you know, wetting agents don't work straight away. They take a little bit of time. They need re-wetting to occur. There's things that need to happen in order to help get that, overcome that hydrophobic nature and let the system start to repair itself and get water going in. So if we put the wetting agent with the fungicide, you know, we're basically expecting the fungicide to work straight away and knock down, and we're expecting the wetting agent to be forming its absolute optimum. So, you know, a lot of work we've done in Australia, and when we're targeting fairy ring, is actually splitting those applications out. Put the surfactant in first, give it time to actually overcome that hydrophobic nature, you know, get the soil system set up for the fungicide application to go in. And if we can actually get the system set up properly, obviously then we get maximum coverage and maximum movement of the fungicide down into the soil environment, and we actually control it, you know, and take out disease inoculum of the fairy ring much more efficiently. So, so basically I always encourage people to look at actually splitting out the applications, put the wetting agent on, you know, even if it's a few days, ideally a week or two, but, you know, worst case scenario, even a few days, just give it time to overcome, and then put the fungicide into the system and get it working for you in the best possible way it can. So just to point this, so this is based on a Sydney soil temperature at 5 centimetre depth. So it's a 5-day average, and you can see there, basically, you know, we've got 2 applications there. We're using tebuconazole because I think, you know, it's generally, so tebuconazole is in a range of products, which Evolution is one of those, Dedicate, and those type of products, Tombstone Duo, those type of products are there that can be used for that situation. And basically, you know, what we need to do is get those 2 applications out before we get to that 21 degrees, which is around here. So, you know, we've got 2 applications out there, September, October. So this is for Sydney. And then obviously we follow up with either the Lister or Monster as an early curative. And that's really, if that's all we really need to do to really knock that inoculum hard and actually hit the fairy ring at the hardest at that time of the year. And obviously we're splitting out the wetting agents between the applications as best we can. So, you know, for Brisbane situations, we actually recommend based on temperatures, we're looking at August, September applications, so we need to start in August. And then if we look at Melbourne and Perth, we really need to be starting in September as well. So potentially, depending, everyone's can measure their soil temperature and actually determine that, specifically, but it might spill into an October start if we go real south, even in places like Hobart or Tasmania, we might need to start in October. But the key is, if we measure our temperatures, we know we need to start between that 15 to 18 degrees Celsius and get 2 applications out before that 21 degrees. And that's the key. So, the key, if you're getting major fairy rings, it's useful just to be measuring soil temperature during that period and working out your timing that way. Okay, so that's just proving the point around the surfactant. So this is a trial done in the US. This is with Lane Treadway again. You can see there, so this is evolution applied at 3.18 litres per hectare and 6 litres per hectare. And then it's evolution there, that's at 6 litres per hectare plus revolution. And if you see there, it's still, okay control, but you can see what's happened here is it's got less control. So the higher the number, or the higher the thing here, that means that this is percentage fairy ring. So the higher the graph, the more fairy ring that's there. As you can see with the untreated control, it's higher than these. But the key here is that although it's worked okay still, it's still, and it's statistically better than the untreated control, you're still not getting as good control with the application by itself. So the key with this was the wetting agent was applied prior to the application and in these treatments. And you can see that we've actually maximised, we haven't actually, by having this surfactant in here, we've actually let this, some of the active ingredient, it's helped get it into the leaf. And therefore we haven't actually got movement, with a full amount of active ingredient going down into the root zone and getting into the fairy ring. So, or into the region where the fairy ring is. So therefore you can see it's actually inhibiting control. And similarly, revolution, by itself and has worked okay. So you can see there that it's actually overcoming, obviously surfactants help overcome that hydrophobic nature, but they don't actually fully control, the disease without putting a fungicide into that program. Okay, and lastly, this is just pointing the same thing again. So this is just the US trial again, Lane Treadway's work in the US, and you can see there, this is basically phytotoxicity as a result of using Balaton, which is tridominol, so similar to Bafidin in terms of it's not exactly the same, but similar mode of action group and similar mode of action in terms of it's tridomethol, not tridominol. But you can see there, if you mix, so this is DMI, you mix it with a revolution, which is a soil wetting agent, and you actually enhance phytotoxicity. So that's because it's sitting on the leaf, enhance the amount of active ingredient that goes in. We obviously need to use higher rates to kill the fairy ring fungus, and as a result, we actually enhanced how much went into the leaf, and then we created a bit of phytotoxicity as a result. So if we are comparing to this one, obviously we've seen a lot, we haven't got as much phytotoxicity as a result of going in with that fungicide without the wetting agent. Okay, so that's pretty much fairy ring. Obviously we'll go through, if anyone has any questions, we can talk offline, or I'll go through the questions at the end. The next one I just wanted to go through fairly briefly is ERI management. Obviously, again, this whole changing environment, this whole wet-dry cycle, I think applies a little bit to ERI management as well. There's a lot of work done by an author, Smiley, in the book Compendium of Turfgrass Diseases, where they talk about ERI being, the ERIs are poor pathogens in general. They don't actually go in and target the root system really well. They usually need an entry point to get in, and quite often that's moisture. So if it's sitting there, they're always there, they're always growing through the root zone. And as we get poor moisture conditions and the plant gets stressed, that's when the disease moves in and causes problems. So, moisture management is critical in ERI disease, just like it is in fairy ring control. So ERI means ectotrophic root infecting fungi. So it's a massive group of funguses. It includes a whole raft of different genuses of diseases. I think it really started with take-all patch, which is the Gwenomyces graminis variety of Vino. Then in basically the US, they identified Bermuda grass decline, which is Gwenomyces graminis variety graminis, which we've now seen in Australia. And then basically in the 90s, Marcel Sterling actually identified a pathogen, which is a Gwenomyces species, but wasn't exactly the same as the Bermuda grass decline in the US. And it was, so they identified that as Gwenomyces as a Phylophora group. So that sort of came next. Then there was work being done in South Australia in places where Magnaporthy, which is another ERI type disease, it's actually, it's not the same disease as Percy Wong has sort of indicated in Australia previously, but it's that summer decline sort of complex in the US. It's sort of linked to that. And then Percy's identified a few other pathogens, which I'll run through those quickly. Obviously, spring dead spots in that group as well. And then fairway patch, which is Percy's actually recently identified as a Phylocephala, is now sort of quite prevalent through a number of states as well. So, what we're talking about here is a massive group of fungi. And the best way to understand which one we've got is we really do need to work out, we need to plate the diseases out, because looking under the microscope, they all look very similar. They all have very much the same structure until they produce a fruiting body. And most of the time, we can find it, in plant tissue, like the fruiting body. Sometimes it's rare, but sometimes we do. And that helps with identification. So you can see here, this is basically that, the fruiting body produced by Couch decline or Bermuda grass decline in the US. And that's the Hyphopodia, which is the fruiting body. And when we see that, we know exactly what we're dealing with. But quite often we don't see that under the microscope. And as a result, it's very hard to determine which one we're dealing with. So the only way we can actually positively identify that is get it plated out. So, we worked out a way to get, plating out done reasonably quickly and efficiently nowadays. And it's not that costly to do. And it is, it's really critical to work out which one we're dealing with, so that we can actually then help put a program together, sort of aiming at that particular disease. If we look at, I guess, the factors that cause fairy ring, so this is based on a lot of the research. I think the biggest one is heavy levels of thatch. So Graham Sterling sort of, saw that really created a link between thatch and these diseases. And from experience in the field over the last 5 to 10 years, pretty much, I guess it's just purely they feed on the thatch just like the fairy ring fungi do. They harbour in there, they grow, they populate in there, and then obviously when they wait their time out, wait for the plant to get under stress, and that's when they enter the plant. So removal of thatch is probably the biggest single factor we can do in reducing the amount of ERI activity we've got. Low levels of plant available P, so Clark and Gould did some work in 1993 showing that, I guess, low levels of P in the plant, obviously root system isn't as healthy. If we haven't got phosphorus availability, obviously we know that phosphorus gets locked up a lot in the soil. So unless some is there available to help the plant grow, if the plant stops, obviously a disease can move in. So and it can be under stress. So, again, using plenty of, we don't want to overuse phosphorus, but we want to basically, we need phosphorus in our programs to help, keep the root system healthy and developing. And obviously low levels of K within the soil has also been identified as a possible cause as to why ERI get into the plant. And then a lot of work done by Graham and Marcel Sterling has shown high levels of available soil nitrogen is actually a critical factor in the development of the disease as well. So, obviously going back to using slow release nitrogen sources and so forth to actually help have a consistent level of nitrogen, not high levels, spikes up, and peaks and troughs of nitrogen, actually helps in managing the disease better as well. So ERI fungi can spread from plant to plant, basically through direct contact with infected roots or colonized organic material. So generally, we were talking, a lot of the actual spread actually occurs during and is disseminated through cultural practices like aeration, dethatching, and so forth. So I think one of the keys is to cleaning down equipment that from greens that have ERI, obviously using good hygiene practices and actually cleaning equipment down from when we're going from green to green will help stop the spread. A lot of research, being such a large group of funguses, obviously, the temperatures that they grow in is quite wide and varied. So, we're talking they grow between 18 to 35 degrees Celsius. So that's pretty much a fairly wide range. And that's because we're dealing with so many different pathogens. The exception to all of that is spring dead spot, which actually grows in cooler temperatures. And you're basically 21 degrees and below. So it initiates growth at 21 degrees and grows better and better the cooler it gets, pretty much. I guess one of the other things to talk about is pH. So the higher the soil pH, obviously the quicker that these pathogens generally can grow. So they prefer higher pH soils, but they'll grow at any soil pH, just that they'll grow slower. So I think a lot of people talk about the fact that if you reduce your pH, you won't get the pathogen. You do. It's just purely that they grow a little bit slower in those soil pHs. Okay, so I just really wanted to make you aware of that there's new ERIs popping up all the time. So as we know, I think there's a lot of talk. Percy Wong's done a lot of work talking about fairway patch. So it's a new group. So really, there's a lot of these things we still don't know a lot about. But yeah, basically it's been identified, and he did a lot of work on it. And yeah, it's now called Phylocephala. It's again, we're still working out strategies to control it, but you can see there that this is the fairway patch disease, and you can see the defined rings, which basically can grow over several years. It initially was identified in Sydney, and we see it basically now in most states of Australia. Summer another one that he's found. Again, heavily focused on cooch varieties and hybrids in South African cooches, but also seen in Kaiku, and it's found in most states. And it's not really, doesn't create a patch disease, but it debilitates the stolons. You can see there the real discoloration and black, sort of distortion of the stolon. So it sort of destroys the stolons, and then obviously you lose plant material, it can't recover, from traffic and so forth, and then it sort of melts away. So you can see that it's coming, and it's really starting to. This disease, I'm sure we've all come across before. I guess Percy's identifying a lot of these new diseases, but we're trying to catch up now in terms of understanding now how we deal with those diseases as he sort of comes up with these pathogens. Adelaide patch is another one. So predominantly on it's I guess one good thing about Adelaide patch is it's less common. So we don't see it as common as some of the other pathogens that we've been talking about. But yeah, it was first identified in Adelaide. It's also found in buffalo, and the actual pathogen is now called Wongia goretti, but it was actually classified as a Magnaporthy before that. So these Magnaporthy groups are definitely, they're in Australia. And we're basically trying now to work out the best programmed approach and how to take these pathogens out. And then there's another one, basically called Deniliquin patch that Percy's come across. You can see there the real distinct sort of disease patches that it creates. When you can I've definitely seen these situations, and when he started bringing this stuff out, you sort of think, oh, I've seen those situations before. So yeah, these new pathogens are definitely, you know, he's found plenty of them. It's just now trying to work out how we actually overcome these pathogens. And I think, you know, really I just put these in just so you're aware that there's new ones coming, being identified, and now, you know, we can't just, I guess this whole ERI group is so large, it's now trying to understand how we, you know, sort of program around that. In terms of management of, you know, cultural practices and so forth, you know, obviously we need to encourage conditions that favour high microbial activity. So high, you know, what they've found with a lot of the ERI group, and Percy Wong's done quite a bit of it, you know, if we encourage beneficial microbes in the soil environment, you know, by creating good moisture, creating good oxygen levels in the root zone, you know, providing soil carbon, you know, as a food source for the microbe populations, we actually help, you know, we're growing natural populations that are antagonistic to ERIs. As I said before, you know, the biggest thing is to reduce the potential inoculum of the disease that can build up in organic material. So basically, you know, reducing Dutch accumulation is really important, and using biological control options. This is Percy Wong in 2017 sort of indicated that he was finding trichoderma type fungi were actually helping in the management of the disease. So, you know, again, there's a lot of trichoderma products on the market, but using those as well as naturally building good biological or good microbe levels in the soil will help definitely, you know, keep the disease, will keep the population antagonistic to the disease there and help reduce its growth and spread. Obviously, the other key is keeping the root system as healthy as we can. So we spoke about low phosphorus before. Obviously, using bits of phosphorus, making sure that there's available phosphorus to the root system is important. You know, using the kelps and the humates and just generally having good soil nutrition will help, you know, improve, you know, the root system, keep it healthy, keep it growing. You know, don't allow points of entry, times of entry for the disease to move in. And where possible, I know it's a hard thing to do, but yeah, we can raise mowing heights to reduce the pressure if we're getting really bad ERI activity. One of the other things that we've noticed a lot in looking at a number of disease samples that come in with ERI, quite often we see that there's a real link between secondary diseases like curvularia and ERI. So obviously when the plants are unhealthy, the ERI disease is working on the root system, debilitating the root system. And then you get these secondary diseases come into the leaf and they sort of hit it at both ends of the plant and they really struggle to get control. So as a result, I think it's really important, yeah, whilst we're trying to manage these diseases at a root level, you know, we can't forget about these secondary disease presence, and we do need to put in a good preventative program, or, you know, to keep those foliar diseases at bay at the same time. So curvularia, you know, obviously we generally see that most of these ERI diseases occur during the summer. Obviously they build up in their populations during spring, obviously, and then all the pressure comes on in summer, and obviously curvularia and some of these secondary diseases like those higher temperatures. As a result, you know, they come in, jump on top of a weakened plant and make it grow and sort of make it go backwards, and then stop its recovery as well. So everything you're trying to do to help increase the root system, if you don't create those, you know, treat those foliar diseases as well, you know, you can feel like you're never getting on top of the pathogen. Okay, so I just wanted to just go through how, you know, I just thought when I was thinking about how do we look at a program, I sort of, these are the, I guess the key rules that I look at in a fungicide program. So obviously, you know, the key to really, you know, once you get ERI, it's a bit like the Fairy Ring. You know, it takes a serious amount of time to get on top of the disease once you've got it. So really, you know, that preventative approach is critical to getting a good result. And I think we've proven, you know, in several cases where we've worked with customers that have had a really high level of ERI, that, you know, getting on that program definitely works, and you know, reduces the number, reduces the potential for inoculum to spread, and we can prevent the disease. But a couple of rules that I work to, and I'll run through this program after that. But I think, you know, there's a few things that, for bits of research that I've pulled together that I use when I put a program together for ERI. So one is, basically based on Magnum Forte in the US, with your summer patch. They basically say, start your treatments in spring before soil temperatures reach 18 degrees. So that's one thing I try to always do, sort of cover off that temperature. So this is for Brisbane, this program, but it can be modified for anywhere. And basically we've initiated the program just before temperatures go to 18 degrees Celsius. The other thing I look at is basically we need to, so that's the spring. So we start our program in spring around before that 18 degrees Celsius, and that's where we initiate the program, and we put a lot of effort into that spring period to try and get the disease under control before we get to this curative situation in these summer months. But then we need to look at, a lot of the research in the US is showing that basically, the way to manage ERIs, and because there's so many of them, we have to sort of cater for the worst case scenario. So we have to look at the back end of the season, and they're saying that, you hit it spring and autumn, and therefore obviously during that summer, that whole summer period, the ERIs generally like higher temperatures, so they grow and consolidate through those periods. And then basically in autumn, if you don't knock the numbers down and get under a manageable level, you're basically going to enter, they'll sit there dormant in the middle of winter, and then they'll come, they'll be active again in spring. So if we don't knock the numbers down in autumn, we're basically starting with a high level of population come spring again. So if we hit it down in autumn, that means when we go to spring, we don't need to go and knock the numbers down as much. We eat into the population more. So one of the things that we look at is, spring dead spot control. It's an ERI disease. And, from what we know from a lot of the US research, is that we need to initiate our applications around 21 degrees Celsius. So here, basically start our applications around this period here in 21. And what we know from from spring dead spot control is that we need 2 applications of a propiconazole product come March, April in this situation, because temperatures have started in March. They'll hit about 21 in March, or a little, maybe a little bit later. So we need to cover off in that period to cover off on those, on both ends, that spring and autumn period. One of the other things I look at is, Bayer, when they first brought Dedicate to market, and it's on the Dedicate label, talk about needing 3 applications at monthly intervals before the key symptoms occur in summer. So essentially this period here, I've covered off, I'm basically trying to cover off with fungicides during that period, all focused on ERI, before we get to that summer period. So I try and get 3 applications in, sort of during that period. And similarly, I do the same in autumn. So I try and get 3 applications in. Obviously, if we're dealing with spring deady, we're also targeting the ERI type pathogens with that application. So you can see there we've got 3 applications come autumn as well. So if we can get, I know it's costly, but if we can get 6 applications over, in that period of spring and autumn, we go a long way to hitting the disease hard. And then it's all about during this other period of the year, just trying to keep the preventatives in place. Obviously, we want to use things like azoxystrobin, and I try to go to non-DMI applications during those key summer months to sort of stop, to prevent DMIs from regulating plant growth and reducing recovery. And really, these here are really aimed at secondary diseases like those curval areas and so forth, and stop them from sort of getting in and attacking on the other, on the leaf, whilst we're trying to help the root system. So one of the other key things is there's some work being done with BASF in the US, where they've, on their label for their pyraclostrobin product, they actually have, they basically say, make initial applications in autumn. This is more specifically for Bermuda grass decline, when when air temperatures reach 26 degrees Celsius and relative humidity is around 75%. So again, in this period here, I just try and cover off on that and make sure I'm covering that period. And then probably the only other thing that we need to think about in the programming sense is basically I guess in terms of, if we're using trifloxystrobin, which is a product in Dedicate and Tombstone, Patriot, so forth, it's a product that has a really high affinity to the cuticle of the leaf, and once it hits the cuticle and sticks, it's very hard to move down. So it does have good activity on ERIs and so forth. It's a strobilurin-like heritage, but the key is we have very little time to get it down into the root zone and make it effective. So generally that, dedicated type product is tebuconazole, trifloxystrobin. So tebuconazole move down, but we want to get both actives down into the root zone to get the disease most efficiently and get both hits at it with two different modes of action. So the key is you've got about an hour after you apply before it's stuck to the leaf. So one of the key things I always like to do is make sure that we irrigate before the spray dries, and therefore we position both active ingredients down well into the root zone. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Yeah, appreciate your time. Hopefully it's given you a bit of understanding of how we look at these things. And yeah, again, as I said before, more than keen to help anyone who's getting prolific problems with both pathogens.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, appreciate that. There's a lot of extremely valuable information, I think, in what Peter's presented there. I'm sure you agree with that. So yeah, that was really good information. I think just a couple of quick take-home points that I got from it was with the Fairy Ring, it's obviously a really big beast of a fungi. I think that was highlighted by Peter talking about that Fairy Ring that was 1,500 years old and weighed 22 tonnes. So obviously that one's not in turfgrass, but I think it just highlights a point that it's a big fungi hyphae. It's not one application. It's better to be preventative. And year on year, just because you resolved it one year doesn't mean you're going to resolve it next year. They're pretty resilient things. I think the other key point in that was the soil surfactant in terms of not doing what's probably intuitive, and that's mixing the soil surfactant with the fungicide. I think, yeah, that was good information to do the soil surfactant probably a week beforehand, and rather than with the fungicide. Tebuconazole, key active for Fairy Ring, in amongst some of the others, but that was the key one, I think, for preventative. On ERIs, again, tebuconazole is an important part of it, but obviously, as per Peter's presentation there, it's a program approach. It's applications in spring, it's applications in autumn, yeah, and really looking at your temperatures, looking at nutrition, looking at all those sort of factors with ERI. So again, appreciate Peter's time with that. Now, next month, we'll do another webinar. It'll be the last Thursday in the month. Again, we'll have another speaker from the US talking about some proven and also some new approaches to crow's foot control. And so, yeah, obviously crow's foot is a pretty difficult weed to manage in turfgrass situations. So should be an interesting one for many and may offer some alternative treatments that you might want to have a think about and try. So look forward to seeing everyone then. Appreciate everyone's time. We'll catch up in a month's time. Cheers.